Okay, let's stick with this top story and turn now to Joseph Moreno. He is a former federal prosecutor and joins us from Alexandria, Virginia. Joe, good to see you. It's been a long time.
Hi, Natasha. Great to be with you.
Joe, it didn't take the jury very long. As I understand it, 3 hours, and they came back with the verdict of guilty. What does that tell you?
Open and shut case. I mean, very straightforward. I mean, Steve Bannon had subpoena that he was expected to comply with. He made no effort to comply with either testimony or documents. It was very clear when he had to comply. That argument about thinking it was flexible is complete nonsense. And the jury made an easy decision. I mean, in fact, Steve Bannon did not even present a defense. He did not testify. He did not produce a single witness or piece of paper in his own defense. Pretty open and shut. That's about as easy as a federal prosecution gets.
Well, you know, you're mentioning defense, and all I'm thinking is defiance, because what we heard from Bannon and the lawyer after the verdict was made public is that he's still convinced that did nothing wrong and that this is going to be overturned. What did you make of that sort of tone that we heard from the two of them?
The tone from the defense counsel about an appeal and all the great arguments that the judge rejected, I mean, that's standard playbook for when you lose a case and you want to tee up an appeal. That doesn't surprise me one bit. I've been a defense lawyer. I know how the game is played. That being said, though, Steve Bannon has a different agenda here. He is a very Trumpian, politically savvy player. He knew exactly what was going to happen. He knew he was going to lose this case. He's probably perfectly willing to go to jail for a few months in order to be a hero to the former president and his followers. So it's sort of a Pyrrhic victory here for the federal government. I mean, yes, they got a prosecution. Yes, Steve Bannon was convicted. He will most likely spend at least a few months in jail. But at the same time, he's still not giving Congress what they want. And now, effectively, they've done the one thing to him that they can do, which is to refer it to the Justice Department and get a criminal conviction for contempt. But Steve Bannon still gets to defy the subpoena.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about next, which is what impact, if any, does this have on the January 6th hearings? Can he now be compelled to come forward? What is the actual impact on that?
I mean, this was the compelling. I mean, right? This is the hammer that you hold over someone when they refuse to show up or they refuse to hand over documents or text messages or whatever it is that you're asking them for, right? You threaten to hold them in contempt of Congress. That was done. You refer it to the Justice Department. That was done. The Justice Department prosecutes you and you get your day in court and you get convicted. Now that's all been done. The only thing left is to sentence Steve Bannon. But the problem with all of this is that, again, at the end of the day, he remains defiant, to your word, Natasha. He doesn't actually have to comply. He goes to jail and he looks like a hero.
He looks like a hero to who?
Well, I think to the Trump fan base. I mean, you know, remember, the defiance of the federal government is sort of a baseline of President Trump, former President Trump's support. I mean, he was the ultimate street fighter, right? The ultimate a fighter against the swamp in Washington, and he still envelops himself in that kind of persona. So Steve Bannon will look like a folk hero to Trump's supporters because he kind of stuck it to the government, right? He didn't fold. He didn't give Congress what it wanted. So while most of us Americans look at this and say, this is ridiculous, of course you have to comply with a subpoena, there's a lot of people here who will feel otherwise and feel like this was a great little victory for Steve Bannon, and he's a hero to them.
Joe, you mentioned that he will likely go to jail for at least a few months. As I understand it, he could go up to 2 years if that's correct. Even if he goes for that time, is this the end of Bannon's story, or are we going to see him reemerge in politics?
Well, I mean, I think it really depends, Natasha, if President Trump reemerges. And I mean, that's the real takeaway here, right? Is, I mean, what happens after the midterms this year and then as we lead up to the 2024 presidential election? If President Trump decides to run again, Steve Bannon will most likely have a high-level role, either officially or unofficially, advising him. So I think, unfortunately, there probably will be a second act of Steve Bannon. He's going to use what happened today not so much as a mark of shame, but almost sort of a badge of honor. And so, again, it's a bit of a Pyrrhic victory here.
Joe, it's been 2 years since the U.S. presidential election, and yet Donald Trump is still the most talked about name, identity, character in American politics, both where you are and where we are. When we talk American politics, we're still talking about Trump. What does that tell you? If he ran again, does he stand a real chance of getting reelected?
Yes, he does. He stands a real chance of getting the nomination and of getting reelected. And ultimately, I say this all the time, people often look to the legal system for a solution and how to handle Donald Trump. And I say, he's a politician. And usually there's no legal solution for someone like Donald Trump. It's a political solution. You have to take a look at all the things that happened in his 4 years of office. What happened after the election? What happened on January 6th? And in the days and weeks afterward, and say, do you really want this person back in the White House? Yes, he's a fighter. Yes, he has followers. Yes, he's charismatic and a showman to many people, but he was an incredibly destructive force at the same time. And so, Natasha, I hope we're not having this conversation 2 years from now, talking about President Trump possibly re-entering the White House a second time.
Well, I'm going to be calling you up again sooner than that, Joe. Big breaking news today. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Thanks, Natasha. Anytime.
Joseph Moreno is a former federal prosecutor joining us from Alexandria, Virginia.